Greetings, my dear listeners. Today we embark on a new journey, and its theme sounds almost like a legend. Could life have been brought to Earth from space? This hypothesis, known as panspermia, has accompanied humanity for thousands of years. It carries something mythical and scientific at once, ancient yet also modern. If we reflect, the question of the origin of life troubles us no less than the question of its future. Where did we come from? Why, on this small planet in a vast and cold universe, did cells arise that can breathe, reproduce, and think? For ancient philosophers, answers were few, and many turned their gaze to the cosmos. In the works of Anaxagoras, a thinker of the 5th century BCE, we find the idea that the seeds of life are scattered throughout the universe and may fall upon different worlds. This thought sounds astonishingly modern. Anaxagoras believed that life is eternal, that it could not have emerged. Centuries passed, science changed, yet the idea kept resurfacing. It attracted with its sense of comfort. If life is seeded from outside, then we are part of something larger, a cosmic experiment spanning many worlds. At the same time, it unsettled. If life can travel, then it may exist elsewhere, and we are not alone. In the 19th century, with the rise of microbiology, panspermia found new breath. Scientists began to realize that microbes are remarkably resilient creatures. They can withstand cold, heat, radiation, even vacuum. The question arose: could such organisms travel between planets, perhaps inside meteorites? And if so, might they have once reached Earth and become its first inhabitants? In the 20th century, panspermia returned to scientific debate. Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe argued that life might be delivered by comets and cosmic dust. Their theory was controversial, but it forced science to broaden its view. If we accept that microorganisms can endure extreme conditions, then why should they not travel aboard cosmic bodies? But here arises a philosophical question. If life was delivered to Earth from beyond, then where did it begin? We move the problem elsewhere, but we do not resolve it. Perhaps life is eternal, and the universe has always been inhabited. Or perhaps there was a first spark, and the only question is where it first ignited. In this opening chapter of our journey, we only lift the veil slightly. We see that the idea of panspermia is not new. Born in the minds of ancient philosophers, carried through centuries, it became a scientific hypothesis in the 20th century. Most importantly, it remains with us because it answers a deep human need: to feel connected to the cosmos. For if life came from there, then we are children of the stars in the most literal sense. And perhaps that is what makes panspermia so alluring. We search for answers not only in test tubes and telescopes. We seek them in our longing to belong to something greater. And if one day science provides a definitive answer, it will change not only our textbooks, but our very sense of self. In the 19th century, as microbiology was just taking shape, researchers began to wonder about the resilience of microorganisms. It was a turning point not only for medicine, but also for the philosophy of life. Louis Pasteur and his contemporaries demonstrated that microbes exist everywhere, in air, water, soil. Life turned out to be astonishingly resilient and ubiquitous. And then came the question: could it exist beyond Earth? At first, it was more a philosophical exercise of imagination, but gradually it took on a scientific form. Scientists observed how bacterial spores survived drought, freezing, ultraviolet light. They seemed designed to wait. The idea arose: if such organisms can survive for years in harsh conditions, might they also endure a journey through space? Thus emerged the hypothesis of lithopanspermia, the transfer of life inside rocky bodies such as meteorites. Imagine, a giant asteroid strikes a planet, debris is ejected into space, and among it are fragments carrying microbes within. For years, centuries, even millions of years, these rocks drift between planets until they finally fall upon another. If the organisms inside are well shielded, they might survive and spark a new biosphere. The thought was captivating. It made life something larger than a local phenomenon. In this scenario, the universe became a vast garden where seeds of life are scattered in all directions. Yet at the same time, it was unsettling. If life came from elsewhere, then its roots are not here, and if they are not here, who are we? In the early 20th century, the first experiments were undertaken to test this hypothesis. Scientists exposed bacterial spores to vacuum, radiation, extreme cold, and time after time, some species survived. Especially striking were results with Bacillus subtilis asterisk, whose spores withstood doses that seemed nearly unsurvivable. Later discoveries of extremophils raised further questions about the limits of life. Philosophically, this produced a paradox. If life is so resilient, perhaps it does not truly need the comfort of Earth. Perhaps life at its core is universal, capable of spreading through space like fire leaping from log to log. In that case, Earth is but one of many hearths, and again we are part of a larger process. Of course, skeptics objected. Laboratory conditions are one thing, millions of years in space are another. Radiation impacts, the heat of atmospheric entry, all would almost certainly kill even the hardiest microbes. But proponents replied, almost certainly is not the same as always. It would take only one survivor to ignite a new biosphere. The second chapter of this story shows how panspermia began to take on scientific shape. It was no longer myth or mere speculation, but a hypothesis testable by experiment. And though no final answers exist yet, the very fact that we ask such questions reveals the boldness of science, for to seek the origins of life is to seek the origins of ourselves. From the mid-20th century onward, humanity not only dreamed of space but began living in it, and it was then that the hypothesis of panspermia gained new momentum. At last it could be tested not only in thought or in laboratories, but directly in space. The first satellites, space stations, and orbital labs became arenas for experiments that had once been impossible. One of the first questions scientists asked was, can life survive in open space? Vacuum, extreme temperature swings, harsh radiation, all seemed lethal. Yet when capsules of microorganisms were placed into orbit, the results were astonishing. Spores of certain bacteria, algae, and even tiny animals called tardigrades endured weeks and months of exposure in space. They entered a state of suspension but did not die. Returned to Earth and given water, they revived. These experiments, conducted by both Soviet and American programs, were sensational. They showed that the space environment was not an absolute barrier. Life could withstand conditions once thought incompatible with existence. Of course, surviving for millions of years would be another matter, but the very fact that life could resist space at all gave strength to the idea of lithopanspermia. Especially important were experiments on the International Space Station. Samples of microbes, lichens, even seeds were placed on its outer panels. Some returned alive after months exposed to direct sunlight and microgravity. It seemed almost miraculous. Once again, life proved less fragile than we believed. Meanwhile, attention turned to meteorites. Since the late 19th century, extraterrestrial rocks had been found on Earth and closely studied. The most famous case is the Martian meteorite ALH 84001, discovered in Antarctica in 1984. In 1996, a team announced that it contained microscopic structures resembling fossilized bacteria. The world was electrified. Could this be direct evidence of Martian life? Later, many scientists criticized the claim, noting that such structures could form without biology. Still, the debate mattered. It showed that the idea of life from space was no longer fringe speculation. It was a topic for leading journals and serious laboratories. Philosophically, all this opened a new perspective. If microbes can survive in space, if meteorites can carry traces of organics, perhaps the universe is built to spread life naturally. Perhaps life is not an exception but a rule, a process woven into the fabric of the cosmos. The third chapter of panspermia's story is about testing and the first pieces of evidence. We do not yet know the final answer, but we now know life is tougher than we imagined. And perhaps that toughness allows it to be not only earthly but cosmic. When we think of space, we often picture stars and planets, but there is another class of celestial bodies that for centuries were feared as omens of doom and today are celebrated as keys to scientific discovery. These are comets, icy wanderers arriving from the depths of the solar system, and they have become central to the hypothesis of panspermia. Comets are mixtures of ice, dust, and organic compounds. As they approach the sun, they heat up, releasing streams of gas and dust that form spectacular tails. But behind that beauty lies important content. In the 20th century, scientists began to suspect that comets may harbor complex organic molecules, and if so, they may have played a crucial role in Earth's history. The Stardust mission, sent to Comet Wild 2, returned particles of its material to Earth. Among them were organic compounds including amino acids, the building blocks of life. Even more impressive were the results of the Rosetta mission, which studied Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko. Its lander Philae detected complex carbon molecules on the surface. This was direct evidence that space is rich in life's ingredients. If meteorites could hide life inside rocks, comets could carry it frozen, like time capsules. Imagine, billions of years ago, a comet strikes Earth, and with its ice and dust delivers a supply of organics. Perhaps it was in this way that the first primordial soup arose, from which cells were born. This version does not claim that comets delivered life itself, but they could have provided the chemical foundations without which life would not have begun. Philosophically, this is a compelling picture. We are used to thinking of comets as harbingers of disaster, but perhaps they were our benefactors. Perhaps those messengers of death were, in truth, messengers of life. The idea flips the ancient symbolism of comets, transforming them from omens of catastrophe into omens of hope. It is often said, "We are children of the stars." And it is true, for the elements in our bodies were forged in the hearts of supernovae. But perhaps we are also children of comets. Perhaps the ice and organics of these cosmic wanderers laid the foundation for Earth's first steps toward life. The fourth chapter of panspermia's story reminds us that answers may lie where once we saw only myth and fear, and perhaps comets, those strange emissaries of the cosmic depths, played a role in our story that we are only beginning to understand. When we hear the word meteorite, we most often think of catastrophe. Massive stones falling from the sky are linked in our minds with destruction, the extinction of the dinosaurs, threats to humanity's future. But in the panspermia hypothesis, meteorites and asteroids play a very different role. They are not only destroyers, but carriers, capsules of life. Scientists have long observed that many meteorites contain organic substances. Particularly intriguing are carbonaceous chondrites, rare stones rich in carbon. Within them, researchers have found amino acids, nucleobases, and other molecules regarded as the building blocks of life. The most famous case is the Murchison meteorite, which fell in Australia in 1969. It contained dozens of amino acids, some not found in terrestrial biochemistry. It was astonishing confirmation. Space truly carries the ingredients of life. But could not only molecules but microorganisms themselves survive cosmic journeys inside meteorites? To answer, scientists perform experiments. They simulate the shocks, heating, and stresses that rocks endure when falling to Earth. It turns out that within large fragments, pockets may remain shielded from deadly heat. In theory, microbes inside these refugees could survive. Moreover, experiments have shown that organics can survive not only falls, but planetary impacts. In laboratories, conditions of massive collisions are reproduced, and some molecules endure intact. This means life, or its precursors, may have traveled not only via meteorites, but also through the violent exchange between worlds. Philosophically, this overturns our view of catastrophe. What we call an ending may be a beginning. A meteorite impact may annihilate entire ecosystems, yet at the same time deliver new possibilities. Perhaps Earth itself received crucial chemical components in this way, enabling life. Destruction and creation are woven together here. In the 5th chapter of Panspermia's story, we see that stones from the sky are not only a threat. They may have been couriers carrying cosmic messages of chemistry to Earth, and perhaps it was thanks to such messages that our planet once began to breathe and stir with life. If we wish to understand whether life could have traveled through space, we should look at those organisms already living in conditions close to cosmic. These are the extremophiles, beings that thrive where life seems impossible. Their existence has become one of the strongest arguments for the panspermia hypothesis. Take, for example, tardigrades. These microscopic animals can enter a state of cryptobiosis, shutting down nearly all biological processes. In this form, they can survive boiling, freezing, radiation, vacuum. In 2007, tardigrades were even sent into space aboard the Photon M3 satellite. When they returned to Earth, some were still alive and even reproduced. It was a sensation. If such creatures survive space, then the possibility of interplanetary journeys for life no longer seems far-fetched. Another example is the bacterium Deinococcus radiodurans *. Nicknamed the Conan bacterium, it shows extraordinary resistance to radiation. Doses lethal to humans 1,000 times over do not faze it. Scientists discovered its DNA can repair itself after being shattered, as if it carried its own built-in mechanic. In space, such an ability could save life from destruction. Equally impressive are archaea inhabiting hot springs, acidic lakes, or the ocean floor near hydrothermal vents. To us, these conditions seem hellish, but for archaea, they are home. Their enzymes function at temperatures near boiling, under pressures that would crush most organisms. They appear designed to show that the boundaries of possibility are far wider than we assumed. There are more examples: bacteria that persist in glaciers for millions of years, microbes that endure total desiccation, organisms that feed on sulfur or iron instead of the sources of energy familiar to us. All of this expands our understanding of what life means. It is not confined to oxygen, moderate temperatures, and sunlight. It can adapt to the most extraordinary circumstances. Philosophically, this inspires astonishing reflections. Perhaps life is not the exception but the rule. Perhaps matter, reaching a certain threshold of complexity, almost inevitably generates what we call living forms. If so, the universe should be full of life, diverse, strange, yet kin to us in its drive to persist. The 6th chapter of Panspermia's story teaches us to view microbes not as simple beings but as keepers of ancient wisdom. They carry secrets of resilience that might explain how life survived cosmic trials and arrived here, on Earth. And perhaps they whisper the greatest lesson. Life is not fragile, it is stubborn, and stubbornness is the finest companion in the vastness of space. When we speak of panspermia, we often imagine distant journeys between stars, but perhaps we should begin closer to home. Earth has neighbors, the Moon and Mars, and with them come some of the most fascinating scenarios of panspermia. Mars is especially intriguing. Its surface is bombarded by asteroids hurling fragments into space. Some of those rocks reach Earth. We know this with certainty, for dozens of Martian meteorites have been identified on our planet. They preserve the chemical and isotopic fingerprint of Mars. Some, like the famous ALH 84001, even sparked debates about possible traces of ancient life. If rocks can travel from Mars to Earth, why not the other way around? Asteroid impacts on Earth could eject material into space, some of which might land on Mars or the Moon. In this way, exchange of matter between neighboring worlds could be a real process. And if microbes were hidden within those rocks, they may have found passage to another planet. Scientists have modeled such scenarios. They found that inside large fragments, microbes could indeed be shielded from the heat of ejection and the radiation of space. The travel time from Mars to Earth could be only a few million years, not long by cosmic standards. And if life arose on Mars earlier than on Earth, perhaps Mars was its donor. But this raises a philosophical question. What do we call our homeland? If life began on Mars and later arrived on Earth, does that make us Martians? Or should we regard as homeland any planet that played a role in the chain of life's transfer? The Moon, in this sense, is a less likely candidate, for it has no atmosphere and no liquid water. Yet it could have served as a storage site, a kind of library of rocks from Earth or Mars. The Moon may hold preserved fragments of life's earliest history. The 7th chapter of Panspermia's story shows us that the concept of homeland grows blurred. Life in our system may have journeyed from world to world, and Earth may be but one destination. The thought provokes reflection. Are we children of a single planet, or of the entire solar system? When we speak of panspermia, we often think of our solar system, meteorites, comets, the Moon, Mars, but the cosmos does not end there. In recent decades, we have learned that nearly every star has planets. Exoplanets are no longer fantasy. Today, thousands are known. And this brings the question of panspermia to a new level. If life could travel between Earth and Mars, why not between star systems? Distances are vastly greater, of course. The journey from one star to another spans millions or billions of years. But is time truly a barrier to the universe? For dormant organisms or organic molecules, millions of years may be only a moment. Scientists are already modeling interstellar panspermia. Imagine, a massive impact ejects fragments from a planet carrying microbes. Some pieces escape their star's gravity and drift through the galaxy. Hundreds of millions of years later, one may strike a young planet in another system. If conditions there are right, life could take root again. The idea seems fantastic, yet hints suggest it is not impossible. Interstellar objects have already been observed, such as the asteroid Oumuamua and comet Borisov. They came into our system from other stellar neighborhoods. This proves that exchange of material between star systems does occur. Why could such bodies not also carry organics? Philosophically, this opens an extraordinary vista. We are used to thinking of life as local, but if interstellar panspermia is real, then the galaxy may be a vast garden. Seeds of life scatter everywhere, fall upon young worlds, and sometimes sprout into new forms. In this case, life is not an exception but a rule, a universal process. Yet then arises the question, if life is widespread across the galaxy, why have we not encountered other civilizations? Perhaps life is common, but intelligence rare. Or perhaps intelligence exists, but as cautious as we are. Such questions expand the horizons of both science and reflection. The 8th chapter of Panspermia's story stretches our imagination to galactic scale. If life can journey between stars, then we are not merely children of Earth and the solar system. We are children of the Milky Way. And that realization makes our story even more astonishing and grand. In the history of science, there are moments when a bold hypothesis sounds almost like science fiction, yet comes from authors of impeccable reputation. Such was the case with directed panspermia. In the 1970s, it was proposed by none other than Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's structure, and his colleague Leslie Orgel. Their hypothesis suggested that life on Earth might have been deliberately seeded by a more advanced civilization. At first glance, it reads like the plot of a novel. Imagine, billions of years ago, beings far more advanced than us launched capsules filled with microorganisms. They drifted through the stars and eventually landed on a young Earth. From these tiny messengers began the chain of evolution that would one day lead to us. In this version, we are the result of another's experiment or even act of creation. Crick and Orgel did not insist this was true. Rather, they offered it as one possible explanation for peculiar features of biology, for example, the universality of the genetic code. Why do all living things, from bacteria to humans, use the same DNA letters? Perhaps because the code was installed deliberately, ensuring that life could follow a common pattern under diverse conditions. Of course, this hypothesis raises countless questions. Who were these hypothetical seeders? Why did they act? If they were so advanced, why do we not see further evidence of their existence? Critics dismiss the idea as more philosophical than scientific. It moves the question to another level without resolving it. If life was seeded, then who created the seeders? Yet, despite criticism, the notion of directed panspermia left a mark on science. It showed that the origin of life can be considered not only within chemistry and physics, but in the broader context of intelligence beyond Earth. The hypothesis inspired some researchers to search for alien fingerprints in the genome, though no convincing evidence has been found. Philosophically, the idea is powerful. If life on Earth truly is the product of another's will, then what are we? Someone's experiment? Descendants of a grand design? And more importantly, does that make our existence less meaningful or more? For if there was intent behind us, perhaps there is also purpose. The 9th chapter of Panspermia's story is a glance toward the boldest version, that life may not have been random, but intentional. And even if this hypothesis is never confirmed, it challenges us with the deepest questions: what life is, where it comes from, and whether we are part of someone else's plan. When we hear the word panspermia, we immediately think of science, meteorites, bacteria, the cosmos. Yet the idea that life came from the heavens is far older than science. It appears in myths, religious texts, and legends told for millennia. It is remarkable. Long before microscopes or spacecraft, humans wondered whether life might have been delivered by the stars. In ancient Greek philosophy, Anaxagoras spoke of seeds of everything scattered throughout the universe. His reflections can be seen as the first articulation of panspermia in history. But similar notions appear in other cultures. In the Indian Vedas, the sky was described as the source of a life-giving rain. In African myths, heavenly gods brought the first sprouts to earth. Even in the Bible, we find the symbol of manna from heaven, nourishment descending from the skies, a sign of care and the begi. Why did this idea persist? Perhaps because people always felt a link between the sky and life. Rain, without which crops cannot grow, falls from the heavens. The sun, giver of warmth and light, resides there. Stars beckoned and frightened, but were always perceived as sources of mystery. It was natural to suppose, if all life depends on the sky, perhaps life itself came from there. In antiquity, comets were often seen as omens of doom, yet in some myths they were messengers of change, carriers of seeds of fate. If we recall modern hypotheses of comets bearing organics, we see mythology and science echoing across thousands of years. Medieval chronicles sometimes spoke of star stones falling to Earth, bringing strange substances. People did not know the word meteorite, but they sensed these were messages from another realm. For them, it was not destruction but a sign. The sky was speaking to the earth. Philosophically, all this tells us that humanity has always felt partially unrooted. We seem to know instinctively that our origin was not limited to the ground beneath us. The idea of life's heavenly source took hold in our culture because it resonated with our inner sense of belonging to something greater. The 10th chapter of Panspermia's story shows that myths and science often walk side by side. Sometimes myths foreshadow discoveries. Sometimes science brings us back to ancient images, explaining them in new words. And perhaps this is the beauty of our search. We seek truth in many languages, yet always with the same desire, to understand where life came from. Today, the panspermia hypothesis is no longer merely a philosophical notion, but the subject of active scientific research. We live in an age when spacecraft can return samples from asteroids and comets, and these missions are step by step revealing the secrets of life's possible cosmic origin. In 2014, the Philae lander, part of the Rosetta mission, touched down on Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko. Its instruments detected organic molecules, complex carbon compounds that may be precursors to life. This was direct confirmation that comets are not just icy rocks, but reservoirs of organics. Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission returned samples from asteroid Ryugu. When scientists analyzed them, they found amino acids and other organic compounds. Similar results came from NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission, which brought back material from asteroid Bennu. There too organics were found. These discoveries are astonishing. Asteroids, wandering through space for billions of years, carry ingredients essential for life. But the question remains, are these ingredients enough for life to truly begin, or are they only part of a far more complex puzzle? To address this, scientists run laboratory experiments. They simulate early Earth conditions, add compounds found in meteorites and asteroids, and watch the reactions. Sometimes such experiments yield amino acids or lipids capable of forming membranes. It is a hint that cosmic organics may indeed have played a crucial role. Current projects go even further. On the ISS, experiments continue on the survival of microbes and seeds in space. Missions are planned to search for organics on Jupiter's and Saturn's moons, Europa and Enceladus. Beneath their icy shells lie oceans that may prove hospitable to life. Philosophically, we stand on a remarkable threshold. For millennia, humans looked at the stars and wondered, are we alone? Today, we are beginning to gather tangible evidence that the cosmos is rich in life's material. And if that is so, the question changes from, could life exist elsewhere, to how widespread is it? The 11th chapter of Panspermia's story is about the science of today. We are no longer only dreaming or debating, but testing. And each new sample from space may be the link that brings us closer to understanding where we came from. The panspermia hypothesis rarely leaves people indifferent. Some dismiss it as fanciful, others find it deeply alluring, and still others see it as a challenge to conventional thinking. But whatever the reaction, it raises questions that run deeper than biology. They are questions of philosophy, culture, even ethics. If life truly came to Earth from beyond, what does that change in our understanding? In one sense, little changes. We remain children of evolution, the result of billions of years of selection and chance. But in another sense, our origin takes on a new scale. We become not only earthly, but cosmic, and that realization may alter the very way we see ourselves. Imagine, within our cells are molecules that may have once traveled across space, born on asteroids or comets billions of years ago. Our distant ancestors were not only the first cells to emerge in an ocean, but microscopic voyagers that endured cosmic cold and darkness. The thought makes us part of the vast story of the universe. Philosophically, this grants a sense of belonging. If life is linked to the cosmos, then we are not an accident but part of a universal process. We are an extension of the cosmos, its expression. This may strengthen our sense of unity with the world and our responsibility toward it. If life is universal, then it is precious. It must be protected in all its forms. But there is another side. If life spreads easily, then perhaps the universe is full of living worlds. Where then are they all? This paradox, Fermi's paradox, grows sharper. Perhaps life abounds, but intelligence is exceedingly rare. Or perhaps intelligence arises but vanishes too quickly for encounters to occur. Ethical questions are inevitable. If we someday find life on Mars, Europa, or Enceladus, how should we act? Do we have the right to interfere with its development? And if that life shares our origin, should we treat it as kin? panspermia brings moral dilemmas for which humanity is not yet prepared. Religion and culture, too, would respond. For some, confirmation of panspermia would expand the scope of creation. God or a higher power seeded life not only on Earth, but throughout the cosmos. For others, it would pose a challenge demanding revision of doctrine. Art, literature, cinema would surely respond with new stories of humanity searching for its place not only on this planet but in the wider universe. The 12th chapter of panspermia's story teaches us that the hypothesis is not only about the past, it is about the future. It asks us, what will we do if it turns out we are part of a cosmic family? Will we embrace that truth and build a culture worthy of such a discovery? We have reached the end of our journey, but in truth, it is only the beginning. The panspermia hypothesis has accompanied us from ancient philosophical reflections to modern space missions. We have traveled from myths and legends of seeds of life from the heavens to the analysis of meteorites, orbital experiments, and returned asteroid samples. Yet the central question remains unresolved. Where did life come from? Perhaps it arose on Earth, with panspermia merely helping it along. Perhaps it truly arrived from beyond, from Mars, comets, or interstellar stones. Or perhaps life is eternal, and the universe has always been filled with it. All these versions remain hypotheses for now, but what matters is that each discovery expands our vision of the possible. Let us recall what we have learned. Microbes can survive in space. Extremophiles show that life adapts to the harshest of environments. Comets and asteroids are rich in organics. Interstellar objects cross the boundaries of star systems. And our culture and philosophy have for centuries carried images of life descending from the sky. Together, these pieces form a mosaic in which panspermia is not fantasy but a plausible story. Yet even if one day we find convincing proof that life came from beyond, one truth will remain. Life here on Earth is our life. It is unique, precious, and demands care. Knowledge of its cosmic origin does not diminish its value. It elevates it. We become part of the grand story of the universe, in which every cell is a witness to an ancient voyage. Philosophically, such knowledge could transform humanity. It may dissolve the boundaries we build for ourselves. We often divide the world into us and them, but if life is one across the galaxy, then all are kin. Human responsibility thus grows even greater. We must protect life, for it is rare and priceless, and wherever we encounter it, on Earth, on Mars, or in a distant system, we must treat it with reverence. So let us end this journey with words of inspiration. We look at the stars not merely with curiosity, but with a sense of kinship. If panspermia is true, then we are indeed children of the cosmos, children of the stars, children of infinite space. And in this truth there is no coldness, but comfort. We are not alone, for life itself binds us to the universe. My dear listeners, remember, we are not merely inhabitants of a small planet. We are part of the cosmos, and the cosmos lives within us. And perhaps the greatest discovery still lies ahead. May our thirst for knowledge guide us onward, to new worlds, to new revelations, to the understanding that life is the greatest miracle, capable of crossing any distance, any boundary.